This video, we're going to look at the digestive system, and this is a big one. So we've got the esophagus and the stomach. As part of the stomach, we'll identify both the cardiac valve and the pyloric valve. And then moving on to the small intestine, we're going to identify the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, as well as the mesentery. And then for the large intestine, we'll identify the cecum. And then in between the ileum and the cecum is the ileocecal valve. So that is the valve in between the small and the large intestine. And then the portions of the large intestine are referred to as the ascending colon, the transverse colon, and the descending colon. And then the last few inches of the descending colon is the rectum, and we'll identify that. And then the anal sphincter, as well as the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. So just behind the trachea is the esophagus. Now the trachea had those rings of cartilage to keep it open. The esophagus does not. It is very soft and it doesn't have any cartilaginous rings holding it open. So that's how you'll tell the difference between the trachea and the esophagus. And then when you look down into it, the esophagus is the one that is not covered with the epiglottis. And there's the stomach, and at the very top of the stomach, the superior portion of the stomach, is the cardiac valve. The cardiac valve is between the esophagus and the stomach. That allows food to enter the stomach, and it keeps stomach acid from splashing back up into the esophagus. That's what causes heartburn, so acid reflux. And then down here near the small intestine, so where the stomach empties into the small intestine, you'll find the pyloric valve, and you can actually sort of see that band right there, and then you can feel that valve. So that's the pyloric valve. This section of the stomach is called the pylorus, so that's why it's called the pyloric valve. So the stomach, and then the cardiac valve at the top, and the pyloric valve just before you get to the small intestine. The first part of the small intestine here is called the duodenum, and it will continue until we reach this sort of sharp curve right here, and that's where the jejunum begins. So once again, right after the stomach, you're going to find the duodenum, and then this first curve right here is the beginning of the jejunum. The jejunum actually makes up most of the length of the small intestine. The small intestine is longer than the large intestine, but it's smaller in diameter. And then the small intestine is held in these loops with this thin sheet of mesentery. And then the large intestine is a larger diameter. The very end of the small intestine right here is called the ileum. And then the very beginning of the large intestine is called the cecum. And then the ileocecal valve is in between. So ileum, cecum, and the ileocecal valve. At the ileocecal valve. Right here is where you would find the appendix in humans at the very end of the cecum. Cats do not have an appendix, but if we were looking at human intestines, that's where you would find the appendix. And then the large intestine is separated into sections. So the ascending colon, the transverse colon, and the descending colon. So ascending, transverse, and descending. And then the last few inches of the descending colon is the rectum, right there. So that's part of the colon. And then the anal sphincter is what opens and closes to allow waste to either exit or be kept inside the body. So the anal sphincter is just inside there. And then right here is the liver. The liver, similar to the lungs, also has lobes. So you'll see these different segments of the liver. And then if you lift this one up, you'll see this little sac right here. In some of your cats, this may be green because this is the gallbladder. And so it may have a greenish color because of the bile. So the liver just there, and then the gallbladder between those lobes. And finally, we're going to look underneath the stomach and lift up this greater omentum here. We'll look at that when we get to the lymphatic system. But just underneath there is the pancreas. Now, the pancreas is pale in color, and it has a kind of a spongy texture. So you'll find that right underneath the greater omentum.